that. So thank you.
So go ahead, Helen, and when we're done and we start to take questions, we will at the end put the sign-in link for anyone who missed it.
Okay, thank you. So welcome everybody. It's already April. I know this is a very busy month for most schools with testing. So welcome to our April special ed office hours. Um, Dee Dee's going to do most of the slides today because I had a little eye surgery and I looking at the screen with sunglasses on. So I will chime in here and there. So, Dee Dee, I'm going to let you go ahead and take it away.
Thanks, Helen. So the things that we're going to talk about today are based on the recent questions that we've had, and we're going to talk about closing the ETR, or this would also be for an IEP as well after a meeting takes place. um, Reporting trials in the progress report when the IEP is new and you haven't had a full um, grading period, whether retests count in the alternate assessment justification, the requirements for sending an IEP draft home before a meeting, and whether a change in category requires the ETR and the IEP to be treated as initials, and then what do we do when something is not applicable on the ETR planning form? And then, of course, we'll take your questions at the end. Okay, so Helen, you just jump in whenever you want, okay? All right.
Okay. I'm sorry, you
So,
go ahead. You're
okay.
fine.
So, our first question is there anything that indicates how soon after an ETR meeting it should be closed? And when we were asked this question, we were told that someone said 14 days, but no one could find anything, in the operating standards or the Ohio Revised Code that indicated that. And the answer is that, and this would be true for an IEP as well. Once it has been signed by everyone and shared with the team, specifically for an ETR that includes the parent, it is closed. Like once you hold the meeting and everybody has signed it, it is technically closed, but it's not closed in the reporting system. And there isn't anything in, the operating standards or the ORC that dictates a timeline for when you close it in EMIS. Now, in the EMIS manual, your EMIS person may say there's a deadline by which they need to have things closed. Um, but there isn't anything that would be a compliance factor for that. As a best practice, we definitely would say that closing documents within 14 days is a completely reasonable expectation. And your district or community school may want to establish a policy for whatever that timeline looks like for you. But 14 days is more than enough time to leave something open. You don't want to get into a practice or allow a practice where folks don't go in and close things out in the system, because that does actually present some problems. You don't want to have things left open indefinitely, particularly for the IEP. When you do that, it causes a problem with the progress reports, because the progress reports are based on the completion of an IEP. And if you don't close that IEP, it can affect how the progress report opens and how it then generates the reporting period. So again, something you could establish at the local level, but we think that 14 days is a reasonable amount of time. And Helen, if you have anything you want to add at any point, just tell me to pause and you can chime in.
Okay. At this point, I don't have anything to add, but yes, I will let you know.
Okay. The second question, um, and this has actually come up more than once, is someone asked how many trials have to be reported when the IEP starts, much later in the grading period. IEP dates, when you have an IEP meeting, they don't just magically line up with it's the start of a brand new grading period. You could be 2 weeks away from the end of a grading period when a student's IEP begins. And someone said that an advocate told them that they had to have the full amount of trials. So, if you wrote the goal, that the student was going to do it in 6 out of 8 trials or opportunities or whatever, that you'd have to have all of those data points in that progress report, even if the IEP started 2 weeks from the end of the grading period. And then subsequently they also said that if you have interims, that you have to have the full amount of trials or data points in the interim. And that's simply not true. We've never heard anyone say anything about that. That is not supported in the operating standards or the Ohio Revised Code. The number of trials depends on how the goal was written. And, the one thing we would say is there should be a reasonable number of trials conducted with the student in relation to how much time is left in the grading period. We don't want people to say, oh, well, there's only 3 weeks left in the grading period, so we're not going to do anything. That's not appropriate. But it's also kind of silly to expect that you would have a full set of data points if you only have 2 weeks left in a grading period when the student's IEP started. You're already going to have baseline for student in the plop. And so you should have some data points, but you're not necessarily going to have a full set of data points. So I'm not sure where that misconception came from or that misunderstanding, but no, you wouldn't have to. And honestly, uh, I would think any parent would understand that as well. So, you're not necessarily going to be able to do that. Now, if it works out that you can, because you're working on something every single day, and you can have a full set of data points, great, that's wonderful. But there's not an expectation that you would have that. And the thing about interims is interims are exactly what that is. They are a halfway point into the grading period. So you should have half at least of the number of trials or the number of data points that would be expected in the full grading period. So we would expect you to have half of those at the interim point. And you may have more, but you certainly should have half or close to half of those. Um, Again, we're just saying there's nothing in law to our knowledge that would refute that. And what we can say is that in IDEA reviews conducted by the Office of Exceptional Children, they have accepted that. So that tells us that, that is acceptable and that it is an unrealistic expectation that, again, that you would have a full set of data points when you're talking about a shortened amount of time for a reporting period. And we didn't say this at the top of the hour, but as always, if you have any questions about anything as we're going through, please feel free to unmute and ask or drop it into the chat, and we will stop and pause to clarify if we need to.
Yeah, I'm checking the chat, Dee Dee.
Thank you, Helen. So the third question is we were asked about students who are retesting for the alternate assessment. Do retest count in the justification, in the district's justification and assurances? And the answer to that is no. Although the template at this time only mentions end of course exams, no, you do not count alternate assessments. And we did clarify with the Office of Assessment at the department, and they did recognize that that template hadn't been updated in quite some time. And so I'm sure that they're going to take care of that and make sure that it specifically says, alternate assessment retests do not count in the justification. Okay, this one actually kind of took us by surprise, but we got this question 2 times within a week's period of time. So I thought we better address it. we would have thought that this was common knowledge, but maybe not. So it's worth us reiterating this again. We had the question, like I said, pop up twice within several days about, is it a requirement that LEAs send a draft home prior to the IEP? And if so, how many days prior? And again, we were kind of surprised that this wouldn't be common knowledge, but um, we certainly, want to make sure that everyone is aware of the legal obligation. So, short answer is yes. You have to provide a draft to the parent. If you do not do that, it constitutes predetermination, which is against the law. So, in terms of what that timeline should look like, a best practice would be 1 to 2 weeks in advance. What the law requires is that the parent has enough time to review the IEP, really be able to process the information and determine what questions or concerns they have and be able to adequately prepare those before the IEP meeting. Now, having said that, we understand that sometimes emergencies come up, there are extenuating circumstances, someone becomes very ill, or there's an accident, whatever, life happens, and we understand that. At a very minimum, you would have to give it, several days in advance, not 1 or 2. The big thing, though, is that we want to remind everyone is that your district or your community school needs to make sure that you have a practice in place of scheduling IEP meetings in a timely manner, not waiting until the 11th hour before that due date. You want to give yourself enough time so that if something happens and you have to reschedule, you're still going to be within the time frame. So you're not going to end up, being non-compliant because you went over the 364 days. So that's the big thing. So if something happened and a teacher wasn't able to get a draft home to the family, you would try to reschedule with the parent, and make sure that then you could give it to them and they would have enough time to process that information, come up with any questions or anything, before you actually hold the meeting. So again, like, trying to send it home the day before, that is not acceptable because the parent can then legitimately argue that they did not have adequate time to review that IEP. And so that's why we are saying, 1 to 2 weeks. And it looks like I can see
Yeah,
that
there's
we've got some.
questions. Yeah, I'll read the questions to you. From Jessica, can you provide the ORC or area in IDEA for this to reference? That's the first question.
And then I see the other one about
Yeah,
initial IEPs
initial
as well.
IEPs.
Right. And so, and I cannot off the top of my head reference the IDEA area, but certainly we will look at that and then share that back. We're happy to send that out via email for anyone who was on today. And in terms of the initial IEP, that is a little bit different, especially when you're holding, that meeting, if you are holding it very shortly after the initial ETR. It is still, though, a requirement that they have that in advance. Not saying that it has to be, 2 weeks in advance, but um, again, we have to be very careful about predetermination, which is, I just had this question yesterday, and talking with the district about uh, putting the ETR and the IEP meeting right together. Now, we know that that commonly happens. And for a review ETR and a review IEP, that is certainly more acceptable. We understand we're trying to help the parents and not have them come multiple times, but you really should not have the IEP meeting for an initial right after an initial ETR for that very reason. We don't want to do anything that constitutes predetermination. So, best practice is to have that initial ETR meeting and then to wait several weeks before you have that initial IEP meeting. And again, send home that draft of the IEP to give the family
Dee
adequate
Dee.
time to reflect. Yes.
And then Mark asked, is it best to fall on the side of allowing as much time as possible for the parent to review? And I can answer that. Yes. It doesn't necessarily have to be 2 weeks, like Dee Dee said, 1 or 2 weeks, but as much time as possible so the parent does have time to review it and process it.
Yeah, thank you, Helen. Exactly, because ultimately, you don't want to put yourself in a situation where you could have, litigation and a parent could say, I didn't, you didn't give us adequate time to review the IEP and it was predetermination. You made all the decisions, we didn't have a chance to look at anything. And if you are going into court saying, well, we gave you a day, we gave it to you the day before, we gave it to you 2 days before, that would not fly. So yeah, absolutely. And again, that's a local decision that you could make, establishing your own timeline, but we're saying we definitely would say, a week uh, is a reasonable amount of time. And then I see the question about draft ETRs as well. ETR is a little bit different. I know there are districts who do send a draft of the ETR home, and I know many who do not. The ETR is a little bit different because there's a ton of information that needs explanation. That's different than the IEP. There are, scores and charts and all of those kinds of things, particularly around, all of the bevy of assessments that get done for a student. And a parent's not going to be able to interpret or understand those things without someone explaining them. And that's the whole purpose of making sure that you have a qualified team at the ETR meeting so that they can interpret and answer and explain all of those things. So that is a little bit different. Now, the one thing I will say that is required is if you have someone who
Dee
is
Dee, you
not
cut
going to
out.
be present. I'm sorry, Helen, did you need to chime in?
No, I was just going to say you were cutting out there.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Um, so the one thing that is required is if someone isn't going to be present, like one of the therapists isn't going to be able to be present for the ETR meeting, first, you should always try to reschedule. Again, making sure that you're giving yourself enough cushion of when you're scheduling those meetings that you have time to reschedule if something comes up where someone's not going to be available. So you should try to reschedule so that they can be there. If that's not possible, then you need to have that particular person, whether it's PT, OT, whoever that happens to be, that they share their content with the parent in advance of the meeting, and that not just, oh, I sent it by email so they could read it. They need to have a conversation with the parent to explain what those scores and those charts and all of those things mean so that they can make sure that the parent understands and has an opportunity to ask any questions or get things clarified. So, they need to do that prior to the meeting, and then you can go ahead and conduct the meeting. But no, to answer the question of do you have to like send the whole ETR draft home in advance? No, you don't. And again, the reason why is because that requires a great deal of explanation that the IEP does not. So hopefully that makes sense for everyone. I'll pause for a second in case there are any other questions around that. Okay.
Okay.
All right. So the next question is um, we've been asked this a couple of times as well. So if during a review ETR, so a reevaluation, the child's disability category changes, does that have to be treated and coded as an initial eval, and then subsequently the IEP, does it have to become an initial? And if so, would that force a new IEP? that would be an initial. And the answer to that is no. So again, this came up a couple of times, so I'm not sure, where the misunderstanding may have gotten out there. And probably one person talked to another person or someone heard it somewhere. But I even uh, confirmed this with the monitors at the department just to make sure that there wasn't something that had changed that, escaped our attention. And no, the answer is still no. The evaluation is still a reeval. It's just changing the disability category. So it is still a review IEP. Nothing is treated or coded as an initial just because the category changes.
Dee Dee, I just want to go back to a little bit of a question that Jessica asked. I just looked up IDEA. Doesn't specify a set time frame for when parents must receive a draft IEP, like you said, and they do share that usually a minimum of a period of 5 to 10 school days, but they also state that many districts set their own time frame. So I just looked that up in under IDA. I have not looked in ORC. Just wanted to add that.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Helen. Helen, do you happen to see the section code?
Mm. No, I do not. I'll keep looking.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. Like I said, we know it's in there. Just off the top of our heads, it's hard to rattle, the section code to reference. But yeah, absolutely. And again, you heard Helen's language. They're not saying that it has to be. They're saying that that's what they recommend, but it does have to be enough time that the parent can review and process and understand the information. So
Yeah,
thank you,
that's
Helen.
exactly what it says. I'm not saying the time, I mean, whatever, but they want to make sure that parents are able to, participate and draft IEPs are intended to facilitate parent participation by providing them an opportunity to review the proposed plan and offer feedback before the sorry, I can't read the official IEP meeting. So I'll look for where it might be, but I just wanted to kind of qualify that a little bit. So, and if your
Thank you,
school
Helen.
district has a time policy, that's what they set their own time frame. That's what you would follow. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Helen. Okay, so our last question that we got was about the planning page for the ETR. So if in that second column, if you mark not applicable, then do you have to put anything in the third column? So some folks were looking at that saying, if you mark it NA, you just leave it blank. Other folks were saying, well, if you mark it NA, then the third column should say, not a concern at this time. And the question is one of those correct, or it doesn't matter. Either one would be fine. And the answer is the general rule is always for the planning form. Do not leave anything blank. And the reason for that is if you leave it blank, it can be interpreted like, well, the team didn't even consider this area. So, we always say don't leave anything blank. You have to either put that there's sufficient data available, that more information or testing is needed, or that it's not applicable. So if you say it's not applicable, then yes, in that next column, you should say it's not applicable because it's not a concern at this time. Because again, otherwise, when you leave something blank, it looks like the team didn't consider it. And every single area has to be considered when you are planning for the evaluation. And by considering, that may just mean, oh, everything appears to be within, normal limits and we have no concerns, which is fine to put NA, but then you need to say why it's NA. It's because it's not a concern. Okay, so that covers all of the recent questions. Obviously, we get lots of other questions, but they're very specific to situations and not necessarily something that we want to share over office hours. But we're going to open it up to additional questions at this time. So we'll be quiet for a minute. You're free to unmute and ask or put things in the chat.
Good morning, ladies. It's Liz.
Hi, Liz.
How are you?
Good.
What do you suggest we do? We had an ETR. This is a child on scholarship. ETR conducted on the 4th, and we have nothing. Not even a request to sign it. The kiddo's scholarship has basically, we've gone over that. I mean, I've got the IEP done, but I can't upload anything in the scholarship site because I have no ETR because there was a disability change. Any advice other than doing the constant reaching out and asking for it?
So you're trying to get parent signature?
We haven't, no, not even, I mean, the ETR was done by the school district, obviously, in which the scholarship school is. We're writing the IEP. We cannot get this ETR from the school district of service. We haven't even been asked, no one's even been asked to sign this. We held the meeting, we went over results. Nothing's been signed. Yeah.
Yeah, here's what I would say, Liz, is, I obviously, you're going to reach out again, but contact the scholarship office right away
Yeah.
and let them
Yeah.
know. Because that would be something that they may need to get involved in, and they would want to be notified of that, and they would want to be able to take the lead in that. So I would definitely
Yeah.
contact the scholarship
That's
office.
my next step. So, I mean, it's frustrating.
Yeah.
Yes.
Sorry that you have to do that, but yeah, that's why we would immediately involve them.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I'll do that today.
Okay. And Heather is asking about the new proposed
Yeah,
forms
I
and
did.
for review. And do we have any idea when they'll be finalized and pushed out for schools to use? We don't have any exact time, but I don't see it happening till 2026, 2027, maybe winter of 2026. I don't see it happening in the fall. What about you, Dee Dee? Because it still has to go through other channels.
Right. So initially, and you may have heard Helen and I share this before, we had been told that that the public comment period was going to happen last fall,
Right,
and that was going to be, what happened, and then it would go through legal and all of the other, revisions that it needs to based on the feedback, and that the expectation was that the new forms would go into effect at the beginning of the next school year, so 2025-26. But as Helen said, because of the delay and that we're just now entering the period for public comment, we haven't been told, but we did hear sort of unofficially that we're probably not going to be looking at it until, as Helen said, 26, 27 school year because of that, because it does, after this period, then they go back and
right.
they look at revisions that need to be made based on all the public comment, but then it still has to go back through legal again.
Legal, right,
So yeah, I don't think we will be looking at anything coming up for this fall. I think it would be the following school year, probably.
right,
We could be
eh,
surprised, but
right.
we would not expect that.
And there will definitely offer training on it. And just to say up front, I think Dee Dee and I have said this previously, that we don't see a lot changing on the IEP form, more so making it a little cleaner, like testing pages and whatever. There will be some changes, but yeah. like I said, I don't think it's going to be like, I think the last big rollout of IEPs, I mean, I was here, that was a major overhaul. We don't see it being a major overhaul now.
Yeah, and that was in like 2016 or 2017, I think.
Yeah,
So
something like that.
yeah, like Helen said, I think minor revisions based on a couple of things that we know have tripped people up. There's like,
Right.
in the testing section, in section 10, that really odd question about the third grade reading guarantee that sort of confuses everybody. So those are the things that, and a few things in section 7, just to make it cleaner and clearer, as Helen mentioned,
And
that
if you
we're
do get
expecting.
on any of the public comments or whatever, I will tell you, and we've known this for a little while because we go to the state transition meetings, the transition page is going to change. But uh, it, I mean, basically, you're still going to put the same information. They're just going to have certain sections to make sure it all gets in there. So it's more of a template, I think, but
Mhm.
it will change.
Right. And then the next question was, um, if that would affect the IDEA monitoring next year,
Oh,
since it would be current forms.
Dee Dee, you're
And
cutting
right.
out again.
Oh, sorry. Is that better?
Yeah,
Okay. Yeah, they would not during if there's an IDEA review or anything like that. The expectation is that you're reviewed on what is current at that time. And so even if something changes in the middle of a review, they don't make that switch. They continue the
yeah.
review
Dee Dee was
process.
cutting out I'm sorry, Dee Dee. I'm just going to jump in here for a few minutes. You were cutting out again. But what Dee Dee, I think, is saying that you may not have heard that if you're in an IDA review and they're looking at the forms that were presently using, they're not going to come out and say, okay, you're supposed to be on this new form, blah, 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 blah. They're going to base it off of the forms that for the IDA review that you're already working with. Did I get that right, Dee Dee?
Perfect. That's it. All right. Are there any other questions?
I don't see any more. Oh, thanks and bye. See you, Mark. Um, so I guess we'll go to the last slide is April 16th at 9 o'clock. Be sure to register on our website, and the recording will be available in a few days on our YouTube channel. And
And I
let's
apologize. That says April 16th, which is today.
I
So
wasn't even thinking.
yeah, I did not change that. So I am so sorry. That should say, let me look here. Just double checking the calendar real quick.
Yeah, and I should have seen April, known it was going to be May. And thank you all for attending today while we were. Okay, Heather, yeah, that is today. And gee, my brain is not even here today.
Yeah, that should say May 14th at 1 o'clock.
At 1 o'clock.
So
Okay, May
again,
14th at 1 o'clock. It will be right on our website. It will be correct, I mean. So
exactly.
yeah.
Yeah, May 14th, 1 o'clock for the next office hours. And I am going to,
And I think we'll probably turn off the recording in case
yep,
any, but yeah, let's turn off the recording.